The train cuts through the vast Texas prairie in the spring of 1943. Inside the cattle cars, dozens of German prisoners of war sit in silence, their eyes fixed on the landscape passing by the cracks in the wooden walls. They've crossed an ocean, survived the humiliation of defeat in North Africa, and now find themselves in a place that seems to exist outside the war itself. Among them is Karl Weber, a former Afrika Korps corporal who still carries the dust of Tunisia on his boots. He observes everything with a mixture of suspicion and bewilderment. Around him, his companions whisper in German, trying to decipher what awaits them in this foreign land that, until recently, was merely a propaganda symbol in Nazi newsreels. When the train stops at a small station in rural Texas, the prisoners are escorted out by American guards. But what they see defies everything they expected. There are no ruins, no destroyed buildings, no starving civilians. Instead, they find a clean town, with well-maintained houses, children playing in the streets, and shops with full windows. The contrast with the Europe they left behind is so brutal that many prisoners simply freeze, unable to process what their eyes are showing them. The guards lead them to the main square. A local rancher, hired to supervise the prisoners' work, waits beside an old pickup truck. His name is Tom Harrison, a weather-beaten man with a cigarette hanging from his lips and a calm gaze that betrays decades working under the merciless Texas sun. Carl and 5 other prisoners are chosen for this first outing. They will accompany Harrison to buy supplies for the prison camp ranch. The mission is simple, but for these men who have spent months in transit camps and ships' holds, walking freely through an American town is a surreal experience. The group walks down the main street. Texan civilians stop to observe them. Some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. An elderly shopkeeper steps out of his store and stares at the prisoners with undisguised contempt. His son died at Normandy, and for him, these men represent everything he has learned to hate. Carl feels the weight of those gazes. The shame of being a defeated prisoner mixes with the confusion of being treated with a civility he never experienced, even in his own country. A child approaches, fascinated by the German uniforms, but his mother quickly pulls him away, throwing an accusatory look at the prisoners. Inside a general store, Harrison orders the prisoners to help load sacks of flour and canned goods. The store owner, a taciturn man named Joe, watches every movement with distrust. But when Carl accidentally drops a sack, instead of the expected reprimand, Joe simply says, "Careful, son. That flour is worth more than both of us put together." The word son echoes in Carl's mind. No officer, no guard, no authority figure had ever addressed him with such casual humanity. It's a small gesture, almost insignificant, but it opens a crack in the armor of prejudices he carries. As the sun begins to set, the group returns to the truck. Carl looks back at the town one last time. The lights are coming on in the houses. Families gather for dinner. Life continues, simple and relentless, in a country that seems immune to the devastation consuming the rest of the world. That night, lying on his bunk in the barracks, Carl cannot sleep. A disturbing question hammers in his mind. If this is the enemy, what have we really been fighting for? 3 days after the first outing, Carl and his group return to town. This time, the mission is different. Harrison needs help repairing fences on a property near the commercial district, which means more time exposed to the civilian population. The prisoners climb into the truck bed, silent, each lost in their own thoughts about what they witnessed on the previous visit. The work begins early in the morning. While Harrison supervises, the prisoners dig holes and stretch barbed wire under the relentless Texas sun. Across the street, a small diner emanates aromas that make their stomachs growl. Coffee, bacon, fresh bread, smells that seem to belong to another lifetime. During the lunch break, something unexpected happens. A waitress from the diner, a woman in her 40s named Martha, crosses the street carrying a tray with sandwiches and lemonade. Harrison accepts with a nod, and to everyone's surprise, distributes the food among the prisoners. Carl holds the sandwich as if it were a fragile artifact. White bread, ham, cheese, lettuce, simple ingredients, but more than he has eaten in months. He bites carefully, and the taste transports him to a past he thought lost forever. Around him, his companions eat in reverent silence. Martha observes from the diner entrance. Her expression is complex, a mixture of compassion and doubt. Her husband is fighting somewhere in the Pacific, and she does not know if he is alive or dead. Yet looking at those young men eating with desperate hunger, she cannot see monsters. She sees someone's sons. A local shopkeeper, however, does not share this sentiment. He approaches the group with firm steps, his face reddened by anger. His name is Robert, and he lost his nephew at Kasserine Pass, the first major American defeat against Rommel's forces in North Africa. "Why are we feeding these bastards while our boys die overseas?" he shouts, pointing at the prisoners. The atmosphere freezes instantly. The prisoners stop eating, their bodies tensing in anticipation of violence. Carl lowers his gaze, the sandwich still in his hands, shame burning in his chest. Harrison stands up slowly, positioning himself between Robert and the prisoners. His voice is calm but firm. "These men work 12 hours a day on my ranch, Robert. They deserve to eat, just like any worker. They're Nazis," Robert insists. "They're prisoners," Harrison corrects. There's a difference. The confrontation lasts only seconds, but feels eternal. Finally, Robert spits on the ground and walks away, muttering curses. The prisoners remain paralyzed, unable to understand this dynamic where a civilian defends them against another civilian. Martha returns to collect the empty plates. When she reaches Carl, she pauses. Thank you for the work you're doing," she says softly, almost whispering. Carl looks up, confused. "Thank you? For what? For being a defeated prisoner? For working because he has no choice?" But in Martha's eyes, he sees something he did not expect, recognition of his humanity. That night, back at the barracks, Carl writes his first letter home. His hands tremble as he tries to describe what he is experiencing. But the words seem inadequate to capture the complexity of these encounters. How do you explain to someone in devastated Germany that the enemy treats you better than your own commanders ever did? 2 weeks pass, and the routine of supervised outings becomes more frequent. The prisoners gradually adapt to this strange new reality where work replaces confinement, and where interaction with civilians, though still tense, begins to normalize. On this particular Saturday morning, Harrison announces they will visit the weekly farmers' market in town. The market is an explosion of colors and sounds that assaults the prisoners' senses. Wooden stalls display fresh vegetables, homemade preserves, pies still warm from the oven, and jars of honey gleaming golden in the sunlight. Women in floral dresses bargain with vendors, while children run between the stalls, their laughter echoing through the square. Karl and 2 other prisoners, Heinrich and Franz, are tasked with helping Harrison buy supplies. But amid the crowd and bustle, Franz becomes separated from the group. He wanders alone through the stalls, fascinated and terrified in equal measure by this abundance that seems obscene compared to the rationing he knew in Germany. At a pie stall, an elderly woman notices his hesitation. Her name is Dorothy, and she has been baking pies for 60 years. Without a word, she cuts a generous slice of apple pie and extends it to Franz. "Go on, son. You look like you could use something sweet." Franz accepts with trembling hands. The first bite is a revelation. Cinnamon, sugar, butter, apples cooked to perfection. Tears well in his eyes, not from the taste, but from the shame of receiving such kindness from someone whose country he fought against. "Thank you," he murmurs in broken English. Dorothy smiles sadly. "My grandson is about your age. He's somewhere in Italy right now. I pray every night that someone over there shows him the same mercy I'm showing you." Meanwhile, Carl finds himself in front of a chili stand. The vendor, a Mexican-American named Miguel, offers him a small cup to taste. The spice burns his mouth, but behind the heat, there is a complexity of flavors he has never experienced. Miguel laughs at his expression. "Too hot for you, German? This is real Texas food. You work on Harrison's ranch. You better get used to it." There is no hostility in Miguel's voice, only a casual camaraderie that disarms Carl completely. For the first time since his capture, someone is treating him not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but simply as another person. Heinrich, however, refuses to engage. He observes everything with cynicism, maintaining an emotional distance. When a child approaches him offering a homemade cookie, Heinrich turns away coldly. "Don't accept their charity," he hisses to Karl in German. "This is manipulation. They want us to forget who we are, what we fight for." Karl looks at the cookie in the child's extended hand, then at Heinrich's hardened face. He sees a man clinging desperately to an ideology that is crumbling with each act of kindness, with each gesture of humanity. That afternoon, as they return to the ranch, Karl carries a paper bag with a piece of Dorothy's pie. Harrison pretended not to notice when she slipped it to him. The pie sits on Karl's bunk, untouched. He stares at it for hours, wrestling with a question that refuses to leave his mind. How can such generosity exist in the heart of the enemy? The following week brings unexpected rain to Texas, a blessing for the parched land, but a complication for ranch work. Harrison decides to use the day for maintenance tasks in town, which means another outing for the prisoners. This time, they will help repair the roof of a small church on the outskirts. The church is modest, white-painted wood with a simple cross atop its steeple. The pastor, Reverend Thomas, is a man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands calloused from years of manual labor alongside his congregation. He greets the prisoners with a firm handshake, a gesture that catches them completely off guard. "Welcome, gentlemen. The Lord's house needs strong backs, and I'm grateful for yours." Karl and his companions exchange uncertain glances, a man of God treating them with dignity. In Germany, priests who showed compassion to enemies were branded traitors. The work begins under a sky threatening more rain. On the roof, Karl works alongside a local cowboy named Jack, a man of few words but efficient movements. They work in silence for an hour, passing tools and shingles in a rhythm that requires no verbal communication. During a break, Jack pulls out a pack of cigarettes and offers one to Karl. The gesture is so natural, so devoid of ceremony, that Karl accepts before thinking. They smoke together, sitting on the roof's edge, overlooking the flat Texas landscape stretching to the horizon. "You got family back home?" Jack asks suddenly, his voice rough but not unkind. Karl hesitates. "A mother, 2 sisters. I don't know if they're alive." Jack nods slowly, exhaling smoke. "My brother's in France somewhere. Haven't heard from him in 3 months." He pauses. "War's a bitch, ain't it? Turns good men into enemies." The simplicity of the statement hits Karl harder than any propaganda speech ever did. Here, on a church roof in Texas, sharing a cigarette with a cowboy, the absurdity of war becomes crystalline clear. Below, Reverend Thomas brings out lemonade and cookies for everyone. He insists the prisoners sit at the same table as the American workers, ignoring the uncomfortable looks from some congregation members who have gathered to watch. Franz, still haunted by Dorothy's kindness at the market, finds himself sitting next to an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson. She begins telling him about her garden, about the challenges of growing tomatoes in Texas heat, speaking to him as if he were her grandson. Franz listens, captivated, his defenses crumbling word by word. Heinrich, however, remains apart, refusing the lemonade, refusing the conversation. When Harrison approaches and quietly suggests he accept the hospitality with grace, Heinrich's response is bitter. "This is a trap. They're trying to break us, make us forget our duty." Harrison studies him for a long moment. "Son, there's no trap here. Just people trying to get through the day with a little dignity. You might want to learn the difference." As the sun sets, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the prisoners help clean up. Reverend Thomas shakes each man's hand again, pressing a small Bible into Karl's palm. "For the difficult nights," he says simply. That evening, Karl opens the Bible. Inside the cover, someone has written, "We are all God's children, even in war." The return to the ranch that night is unusually quiet. Even the truck's engine seems muted as Harrison drives through the darkness, the headlights cutting through the warm Texas night. In the back, the prisoners sit lost in their own thoughts, each processing the day's experiences in different ways. Back in the barracks, the discussions begin. Karl sits on his bunk, the Reverend's Bible still in his hands, while around him, his fellow prisoners debate in heated whispers. The small room becomes a battleground of conflicting ideologies and emotions. "This is psychological warfare," Heinrich insists, pacing nervously. They feed us, give us gifts, treat us kindly, all to make us weak, to make us forget that we are soldiers of the Reich. Franz shakes his head slowly. I saw no warfare today, Heinrich. I saw an old woman who reminded me of my grandmother. I saw a pastor who treats enemy prisoners as human beings. Where is the strategy in that? That is the strategy, Heinrich counters, his voice rising. They want us to doubt everything we believed, everything we fought for. And look at you, already falling for it. Karl remains silent, but his mind races. He thinks about the abundance he has witnessed in Texas, the full store shelves, the well-fed children, the houses with electricity and running water. He compares this to the Germany he left behind, where even before the worst bombing raids, scarcity was already the norm, where propaganda promised victory while ration cards told a different story. Another prisoner, Otto, speaks up quietly. My father was a factory worker in Essen. He worked 12 hours a day and could barely feed our family. Here I see cowboys and farmers living better than German engineers. How do we explain that? Propaganda, Heinrich snaps. This is all a facade. America hides its poverty, shows us only what they want us to see. But Karl knows better. He has seen too much now, interacted with too many different people. The waitress who feeds them despite her husband fighting overseas. The shopkeeper who curses them but doesn't act on his hatred. The reverend who offers grace without conditions. These are not actors in an elaborate deception. They are simply people living their lives. He thinks about the letters from home that occasionally reach them through the Red Cross. His mother writes about hunger, about constant fear of air raids, about neighbors disappearing in the night. She never mentions ideology or glory, only survival. Perhaps, Karl says slowly, breaking his silence, we were the ones fed propaganda. The room falls silent. Heinrich stares at him with something approaching horror. You're a traitor, he whispers. No, Karl responds, meeting his gaze. I'm just a soldier who is beginning to see clearly for the first time. That night, Karl writes another letter home. He describes the abundance and the kindness, the strange dignity of defeat. He knows the censors will read it, perhaps delete parts, but he writes anyway. His mother deserves to know that her son is being treated humanely, that not all enemies are monsters. Outside, the Texas stars shine with an intensity he never saw in Europe, the same stars that shine over his destroyed homeland. But here, beneath this vast sky, Karl begins to understand a troubling truth. Perhaps the real enemy was never the people across the ocean. Perhaps the real enemy was always the ideology that brought him here. A month has passed since the first outing, and the routine has transformed the prisoners in subtle but undeniable ways. Their faces, once gaunt and hollow from months of uncertainty, now show signs of proper nutrition. Their postures, initially tense and defensive, have begun to relax. But the most significant changes are invisible, occurring in the quiet spaces of their minds. This Saturday, Harrison arrives with news. More prisoners will join the town visits, a reward for good behavior and consistent work. The group expands to 12 men, including several who have never left the ranch compound since their arrival. Among them is a young prisoner named Dieter, barely 19 dice, who still carries the ideological fervor of Hitler Youth indoctrination. The town receives them differently now. Familiarity has bred, if not friendship, at least a grudging acceptance. Mrs. Peterson waves from her porch. Miguel at the chili stand has their orders ready before they even approach. Even Robert, the angry shopkeeper, has downgraded his hostility to cold silence. At the hardware store, Karl finds himself working alongside Tom, the owner's son, organizing inventory. Tom talks casually about his plans to expand his father's business after the war, about his dreams of opening a second location in the next county. He speaks about the future with a certainty that Karl finds both admirable and heartbreaking. What will you do after the war? Tom asks, as if it's the most natural question in the world. Karl pauses, a box of nails in his hands. I don't know if there will be anything to return to, he admits. The letters from home speak of cities turned to rubble, of hunger, of chaos. Tom considers this. My grandfather came from Germany, you know, from Bavaria. He used to talk about the old country, about how beautiful it was. I guess that beauty can be rebuilt, given time and the right people. The statement is simple, devoid of judgment or superiority. Yet it contains a profound optimism that Karl recognizes as fundamentally American. These people believe in rebuilding, in moving forward, in the possibility of redemption. During lunch, the expanded group gathers at the town square. Martha has prepared extra food, and the prisoners eat alongside local workers. Conversations flow more easily now, a mixture of broken English and patient translations. Dieter sits apart, watching with visible disgust as his countrymen laugh at an American's joke. "You've forgotten yourselves," he hisses to Franz in German. "You've forgotten the fatherland, forgotten the Führer's teachings." Franz looks at the young man with something approaching pity. "No, Dieter, we haven't forgotten. We've simply seen what those teachings tried to hide from us." In the afternoon, Jack invites Karl to help him shoe a horse at the local stable. The work is meditative, requiring focus and gentle strength. As Karl holds the horse's hoof, Jack explains the process, his hands moving with practiced expertise. "You're good with animals," Jack observes. "You do this back home." "My uncle had a small farm," Karl replies, "before the party took it for collective use." Jack doesn't respond immediately, but his expression darkens slightly. "That's the thing about freedom," he finally says. "So once you lose it, getting it back is hell." As evening approaches, Harrison gathers the prisoners for the return journey, but before they leave, Dorothy appears with a basket of fresh-baked bread, one loaf for each man. The truck rumbles back toward the ranch as twilight descends over Texas. In the cargo bed, 12 prisoners sit with loaves of bread cradled in their laps like precious treasures. The gesture from Dorothy has left them speechless, each man wrestling with emotions they thought the war had burned out of them. Karl watches the landscape pass by, the endless prairie now familiar rather than alien. He realizes with a start that he has begun to think of this place not as enemy territory, but simply as Texas. The distinction matters more than he can articulate. At the ranch, the prisoners file into the mess hall for evening roll call. The American guards, who initially watched them with suspicion and contempt, now nod with something approaching respect. The work ethic of the German prisoners has not gone unnoticed. They arrive on time, work without complaint, and maintain discipline without constant supervision. After lights out, the barracks becomes a confessional. In the darkness, men who would never speak openly during daylight hours share their thoughts in whispered German. Otto speaks first. "I received a letter from my wife today. She writes that our neighborhood no longer exists. A bombing raid last month. She and the children survived by hiding in a subway tunnel." Silence follows. Then Franz asks the question they are all thinking. "What are we returning to?" "Our duty," Heinrich responds automatically, but his voice lacks conviction. "Duty to what?" Karl challenges. "To a regime that sent us to die in Africa. To an ideology that has left our families starving in ruins. I've seen more humanity in 1 month here than in 4 years of service to the Reich." Another prisoner, a former schoolteacher named Werner, speaks up. "I taught my students that Americans were decadent as weak, corrupted by democracy, but these people work harder than anyone I knew in Germany. Their farmers produce more food than our collective farms ever did. Their system, whatever we were told, clearly functions." "This is treason," Heinrich hisses, but several prisoners laugh bitterly at the accusation. "Treason against what?" Franz asks. "Against lies. I was told Americans were our enemies, that they wanted to destroy German culture. But the Reverend gave Karl a Bible in German. Dorothy bakes bread for prisoners who might have killed her grandson. Where is the hatred we were promised?" Karl pulls out the letters he has written home, now several pages thick. He has documented everything, the abundance, the dignity, the small kindnesses that have accumulated into something larger. He knows his mother will read between the censored lines, will understand what he cannot say directly. "I think," Karl says slowly, "that we were sent to fight a war that was already lost. Not lost on battlefields, but lost in the fundamental comparison between their system and ours. They don't need propaganda, because their reality speaks for itself." In his corner, Dieter remains rigid with fury, but Karl notices that even the young man no longer argues as vehemently. The evidence of his own eyes has begun to erode the certainty of his indoctrination. The next morning, as they prepare for another day of ranch work, Carl notices something remarkable. The prisoners move with purpose, even a kind of dignity. They are still captives, still enemies technically, but they carry themselves differently now. Harrison observes this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He has seen it before with other prisoner groups, this gradual awakening to reality. Some call it re-education, but Harrison knows better. It is simply exposure to truth after years of lies.